Welcome back to the Stitch Sessions, and welcome to this segment of Crochet Quick Chat. It's been a little while. How are you guys? How are things going? The world is kind of going topsy-turvy between pandemics and all kinds of crazy things that are going on. So I do hope that you're all staying safe and healthy and as positive as you can be. Maybe you are staying extra crafty to keep yourselves busy. And so we're going to talk about a couple of interesting things today. And in this segment, I'm going to answer an interesting question that one of my crochet students posed to me. And I thought you guys might be interested in hearing the answer to this. But before we get into that, I wanted to remind you guys that this spring we launched our very first interactive online crochet class. So you already get access to all of my free crochet tutorials on YouTube. But when I moved my in-person crochet classes to online with the quarantine, I also made them open up to anyone, including all of you guys. So no matter where you live, you can also participate in these classes. And the best way to find out when our next one is beginning would be to visit the website, which is crochetcrafty.com. And I'll just leave that somewhere up here on the top so you guys can check it out. Also, of course, there will be a link in the description box down below with all of that fabulous information. And we also now have a monthly newsletter. And in that newsletter, we always give away one free written pattern. So you're going to want to check that out. Again, you can subscribe to that newsletter in our website. But of course, there's always links for you down below. All right, so let's get into the chit chat today about the leaning seam. The leaning seam. So a lot of times when people are doing things like bags, especially, and hats is another common one. The most common thing that's going to happen is that you're going to see a seam. Your seam line is going to start to lean, which is what I call the leaning seam. And I'm going to put a close-up of this so you can see that. And so what we're going to do today is I'm actually going to take a closer look, and we're going to just kind of get a close-up shot here of how we can fix that or get rid of it entirely so that your work will have a much more finessed look to it. So let's have a closer look. So here you can see that the seam was starting to lean, so to speak, and then eventually it just disappears. So I'm just going to show you how to make this seam disappear, okay? So in this one, where you can see it a little bit more prominently because the yarn is a bit thicker. So you can see that the seam is leaning. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to take this one apart. And I know some of you are gasping. Yes, I have no problems taking work apart and putting it back together again. I'm very comfortable with the inner workings of the stitches. So yeah, I've got no problem doing that. So I'm just going to unravel the top part of this bag and just show you how you can make your seam disappear. Now in this particular project, because I was making it as a produce bag, just something to kind of throw around, I was not very particular about it, so it didn't really matter. And in fact, initially you don't even see it unless you really, really pay attention to it. But I digress. Let me get this unraveled and then we'll get going. Okay, so I've unraveled a few rows of it. So our seam started here right on the end and started to lean over. Now the reason why that was happening is each time, let me just unravel this one here. Each time we slip stitch to join in this particular project, okay, so I've unraveled it quite a bit here, and I just kind of stopped where we would join the round. Now, just a particular note about this stitch we're using, it is the mesh stitch, and I went into the spaces here. It is naturally going to create a lean because of the fact that we're going into spaces, but also you want to take note, and I've covered kind of identifying parts of your stitch in a separate tutorial, and I'll put a link for that in the description box down below because it's really Also very important to understand the structure of your stitches. So every time you crochet a stitch, like whether it's a single crochet, double crochet, half double crochet, in this case it is a half double, whenever you pull through the final loop, the actual loop of the stitch will sit to the right side of it, okay? So this is actually the top of the stitch. So when we're working into this stitch, so there's the post there, this is the stitch that we would work into, okay? So it always sits to the right of it when the right side is facing out. So like when you work on things like blankets or scarves where you work to the end and then you turn your work, when you turn your work, the stitch now sits to the left. Yeah. And that's why it's easier when you work on blanket projects or anything that's flat to maintain a straight edge or seam, we'll call it. And that's because even though when we turn it, it sits to the left, when we turn it back again, your seam will be sitting to the right. So whether it's sitting here or here, it always will even out. So that's why your seam is able to stay fairly steady. Now, when you work in the continuous round, like we are in a bag, we're never turning our work. So we're always stitching into that right stitch. So for example, if I slip stitch to join here, now this one is a chain 3. But if I were going into the full stitch here, you see, I would be slip stitching. I'm just going to ignore that chain 3 for a second. I'd be slip stitching into that stitch there. Okay, so to the right side of it, I'd be chaining 3 and then continuing on. So every time that I would slip stitch, it would be to the right. Like if you ever made like hats, or actually the very first Christmas stocking we made, there was a seam issue. There was a leaning seam, and that was exactly for that reason. So we never did a chain 3, but every time we went into that stitch, the top of the stitch, it kept getting pushed over and over and over and over. So that's why you tend to have this lean here. Now, in 2019, we did a crochet stocking, and what we did there, again, we used a different stitch. This stitch will create much more of a dramatic lean. But what we did to combat the leaning seam is we made sure that we slip stitch to join, always kind of on the heel of the stocking. And so that way it kind of got hidden in the heel of the stocking. So, but what we did there is every time we slip stitched, we would then turn our work along the inside, slip stitch, turn our work, and then work along the outside. So it was kind of like the concept of working a scarf or a blanket. So that seam, sometimes it went over here, sometimes it went over here, sometimes it went over here, sometimes it went over here. But it generally stayed right here, right along the seam of the back. Now, the way I'm going to show you is super easy. Anytime you want to have a seam that disappears, just like this one. So you can see I was fiddling with it, and then I said, nope, I want to get rid of the seam altogether. I just started stitching in what we call the spiral round, okay? Now, in the spiral round, or some people call it the continuous round, we never slip stitch to join, okay? So we never kind of create an actual finish. What we do is we just continue stitching. So as if we're going to just stitch on to the next step up. So in this case, I've been doing chain 1 and half double crochet. So I'm going to chain 1. And then I'm just going to go right away into this space. Even though there's a little bump here, I'm going to go into that space. And I'm just going to half double crochet as normal. So right now, you can see, whoop, it kind of bumped up a little bit. Then you chain 1 and you go into the next space. And you continue your pattern as before. So see? So right now we can notice it because it's just doing a little bit of, see that? It's doing a little bit of a jump. But you see, as you keep going around and around, now it's going to get rid of that definite begin and end, so that by the time you come back around, it will just be such a smooth transition. Okay, so right now we can see still that's a little bit of a dip up. Okay, now I'm just going to quickly go around and finish this and meet you back here so you can see that. Okay, so just come around to the other side so you can see that was the original seam. In this round we skipped up, so you can see just a little bit of a bump there. And all I'm going to do is I'm just going to continue on into the spaces. Oops. Right there. Chain 1. See where there was a little bump there? And I'm just going to go into the space and continue on into the next space. Chain 1 into the next space. So you can see where the official seam ends, and now I didn't slip stitch. You see, it just continued. So now it's just going to be a continuous round. Now, because I'm still so close to the original seam, it might be harder to see. So I'm going to do a couple of more rounds, just continuing. I'm not slip stitching anymore. It's just every time I see a space, I'm just going to continue on working into that space. So I'm going to work just a couple more rounds to get myself away from the original seam, and hopefully you're going to be able to see that the seam is going to melt away. Okay, so I think maybe this yellow yarn, it might not be as obvious, but hopefully if I set it down like that, you can see where the seam was very prominent, it eventually just kind of melts into the background, so to speak. So it's much more prominent here because we were slip stitching and chaining up. Once we got right about, see, I can't even find it anymore. Once we got right about here, we kind of just skipped over and continuously kept working in the round. So you will have a little bit of a jump here though. Okay, so now you definitely have a jump here, and I'll get to that in a second because I know the next question is going to be, well, how do I fix that at the end? But right now I just want to show you guys that this is how I made my seam disappear, by just keeping it in the continuous round, okay? So again, prominent seam, and then eventually it just disappears. So here is where you can see the slip stitching, and then eventually it just kind of falls into the pattern. Okay, so let's just quickly talk about, since I'm here, how the heck you would finish this round, because you're going to have a little bit of a lip here now. So I'm just going to undo this here, and because since we are in a crease, which is exactly where you'd like to end things when you're doing that. Okay, so as I come here, what I would do now is decrease the height of my stitch. So instead of doing a half double crochet, I'm going to do a single crochet, and I'm going to go right into the space there. Okay, so what that does is it kind of brings it down so that it melts, so to speak. And then I would go right into the next stitch and slip stitch. So you always want to size down when you're trying to kind of merge into an edge there. Okay, so you can see it went from a half double, a single, and a slip stitch. And I do that purposely in the crease because it's a lot easier to hide. See that? So now it still looks uniform along the top. And let me just get these things out of the way. Okay, and then I've slip stitched to join here. So it just brought the height back down, and it looks like it all melts into one. Sorry guys, these tails are all over the place. There we go. Okay, and then usually what I would do once I merge the edge here so it looks the same, then I would do like a finishing round. Like maybe I'm just going to do one row of single crochets and then slip stitch at the end here, and then this totally gets hidden and you are off to the races. And there you have it, guys. I hope that gave you a little bit more clarity on working on projects in the round. And that way you can tackle the leaning seam in whatever way that you see fit to create a much more finessed look to your project. And that's it, that's all. Today's Crochet Quick Chat. So I look forward to seeing you guys in our next tutorial, our next quick chat. Maybe you're going to check us out on Instagram or Facebook. Please do chat with me online there. And of course, I love it when you tag me in the projects you do. And don't forget, if you haven't pressed that subscribe button, come on board. Come and hang out with me every week. I upload a new video every Wednesday. And sometimes I throw in a couple of bonuses like these Crochet Quick Chats. And we're also going to be adding a new little segment called Super Beginner Projects. And these are great for people that are just starting out in their crochet journey and how they can apply really basic beginner stitches and techniques to create all kinds of cool projects. So stay tuned for that. Those are coming up shortly. In the meantime, everyone, have a wonderful day. Stay safe, stay positive, be kind, love one another, and I look forward to seeing you guys next time. Bye!